Thank you, Sarah. And at this point in time, I would like to add my own personal welcome to everybody. If you've been with us before, welcome back. And if this is your first time, then we hope that you will find this very helpful and useful as we go forward, and we do encourage you to ask questions. Today we're going to talk about how to reduce training expenses with mentoring. And we felt that this was appropriate. Not only are you kicking off a new year, 2017, but also I'm sure everybody knows that January is National Mentoring Month. So we felt like this was a great time to talk about this topic in going forward. The things we're going to cover today, we're going to talk about the costs of training versus mentoring, and then we're going to be comparing mentoring and training through looking at the features and the benefits of each in going forward. And then we're going to talk about when to use mentoring to reduce training costs, and we're going to introduce a methodology to you called a blended approach. Now, the concept of a blended approach has been something within the OD and L&D areas that has been in place for some time, but we're going to look at it in terms of mentoring and training as a blended approach. But as we get started and we're moving forward, Sarah, can you take us through our first poll?
Sure, Judy. Our first poll is, do you think your training budget adequately addresses the learning needs of your employees? The answers available are yes, you're unsure, or no, we're looking for other ways to address this issue. So far, most of you are voting no, we're looking for other ways to address this issue. We have about 80% voted. Okay, it looks like 62% voted no, we're looking for other ways to address this issue, followed by a tie between yes and unsure with 19%.
Okay. All right, well, I would have to say that that's what we're finding as we go forward, that training budgets are getting reduced. People and resources are getting reduced. So, looking at other ways to address the issue of adequately providing learning needs for your employees is definitely something that we have seen also. And so we want to make sure we talk about that today. So the first thing that we want to talk about is the fact that training can be more costly than mentoring. And there's a couple of reasons for that as you go forward. First of all, one of the things that you know when you create training is if you have to purchase the training from an outside vendor, you've got to pay for the training, you've got to pay possibly for a facilitator, and you have to pay for participant materials. So that can be costly. If you're creating the course internally, you still have to pay for the time, the resources, and those types of things that can be done. Then there's something that begins to happen that can be a problem or with training, and that is that when someone goes to a training course, not all the information is always retained in doing that. One of the things we all know in OD and L&D is the fact that we know that when it comes to retention, individuals normally only retain 18 to 20% of what they learn. Now, that's bad enough when you think about a 4-hour program, a 1-day program, 2-day, whatever it might be. 18 to 20%, that's a lot. But that figure's been updated. And the fact that you all know when someone comes into a training workshop or one of your courses that they've probably got their laptops with them. You hope they put them down during the training, but sometimes they don't in doing that. In addition to that, even if they put their laptops down, they probably got their Blackberries or their phones or whatever it is underneath the table, and they're continually looking and concentrating on that. So the newest figures coming from that are retention is not 18 to 20%. It's more like 13%. And so that's really rough. One of the other things that happens many times with a workshop training is being able to tie it to real-world experience in doing that. The reason we're saying that, and again, all facilitators, we know that when you get a group of individuals together, you've got individuals from all different job roles and parts of the organization and so on. So trying to find examples and demonstrations of practical experience that meet everybody's need is really difficult to do in going forward. Now, some of the things that when you're looking at mentoring make it more cost-effective is the fact that you're using your internal talent. I mean, one of the things that we say about mentoring is it's one of the most cost-effective tools that an organization has to develop their people, because you are using your internal talent. And in addition to that, you're taking and working with individuals who have real-world experience, and they can work with a mentee on how to apply some of the things that they've learned and put them into real-world experiences. But what we're talking about in going forward is what we call this blended approach. It's the very best of all worlds. You're using the training that people get, and then you're reinforcing it and supporting it with mentoring. Now, one of the things that we all know and talk about is the 70-20-10 rule. And there's been a couple of variances to that, but it all comes out to about the very same thing of saying, 70% of our learning, our reinforced, the learning that sticks, the successful learning, comes from when we actually are involved in challenging assignments of what we do. 20% of the information comes when we receive information from someone we've established a relationship, someone that we admire and that we believe in doing that. And 10% actually comes from coursework and training workshops. So what we're talking about is actually taking both the training and the mentoring, blending them together to get the very best results of what we're doing. Let me give you a great example of this. We worked with one organization, and that's exactly what they believed in doing. What would happen is that individuals would go to training for about a week's time, and then they would go out in the field for about 3 to 4 weeks, and they'd work with a mentor. And they got to see how some of that theory that they had learned during the training class was actually put into practice. So they took the training they had, they put it into real-world practice, and they were able to try it out, stumble a little bit. The mentor helped them. They got back on track, and then they went and they got another week's training, went back out for 3 to 4 weeks to work with their mentor, and another week's training. This went on for about a 6-month period. Incredible way in which individuals could take the training that they received and then understand how to use it in real-world situations. Very, very exceptional approach. Now, the goal is to reduce your training expenses, and you can do that by supplementing select training courses with mentoring to reduce your overall training expenses. Now, before we get too much into that detail, let's look at what we mean by training and what we mean by mentoring, and kind of look at the benefits of both of them in going through, because they both have great benefits. When you think of training, we're talking about the fact that normally training is short-term. I mean, even if you go for a 3-day course, and more organizations are taking training in shorter segments of what they're doing, because people can't be off the job, plus that retention level we've talked about. It's often in groups in what you're doing. It's mostly organization-driven. Whether you are purchasing a training course or whether you are creating one, normally it's based on a need that the organization has brought up in doing that. It's very learning-focused, and you've got a lot of knowledge dissemination at one time in doing this. Now, with mentoring, normally that's longer term in what you're doing. It normally is one-on-one. We certainly have examples of mentors with more than one mentee, mentees with more than one mentor, but normally it's one-on-one in doing that. Very mentee-driven. It's based on the needs of the mentee specifically, and it's very relationship-oriented. So when you're thinking in terms of that 70-20-10 and that 20% being creating those relationships, it's very relationship and partnership-oriented, and very career and personal development focused. So that's kind of how you look at mentoring, and then you look at training in doing that. So let's talk in terms maybe of some of the benefits of each of these. Now with training, you've got wide availability. I mean, once you create this course, it's something that can be, repeated, and it's open to a very wide audience in doing that. If a certification is appropriate, then you can get that through a training program, and that can be very important to individuals in their job or their job role. You've got a track record of success because you've got evaluations and those types of things, and in many ways you've got pre and post assessments in what you're doing. So you can begin to evaluate where people started and then where they ended up, and then also assessments about the program itself. You've also, when you need something that's very structured and consistent, training is a good option in doing that. You want to make sure everybody is getting a consistent message of what you're trying to put together. And you're structuring it because people need to understand they need to learn A before they learn B. They need to learn B before they learn C. So that very structured approach is important. And, if it's created in-house, then you can duplicate it. And then you've got an ongoing minimum expense because you've kind of got it set up once. And even though you may do some tweaking to it as you go forward, your biggest expense is kind of out of the way in the beginning. Now, the benefits of mentoring are, again, cost-effective. Because as I mentioned before, you're using your internal talent for what it is you're doing. It looks really at almost 90% of that 70-20-10 reinforced learning. 70% because they're working with someone in actual experiences on the job, 20% because they're working with someone that they respect and someone who has been there, done that, and what they're doing. Many times learning is in shorter segments. So when we think about that 18 to 20 are now down to 13% retention, there's a difference between retention of a 4-hour, 1-day, 2-day, 3-day course than there is in a 1 to 2-hour session that the mentee has with the mentor. Normally, it's learning that is very specific to the needs and culture of the organization. The organization is saying, these are the kind of skills or knowledge areas we need. The mentee is saying, this is my need. And then that is put together with the organization, the culture of the organization. One of the greatest things about mentoring as in a mentoring partnership is that, let's just say that I'm the mentee and I've worked with another organization. I come to this new organization and, I'm perfectly skilled to do the job that I do. But the way that these skills that I have, or these knowledge areas that I have, the way they're implemented within this organization might look a little different than the previous organization I was with. So having a mentor that can help me integrate with the organization's culture and integrate my skills and knowledge area with an organization's culture can be absolutely beneficial in what I'm doing. And again, the mentee learns from an experienced partner, because in most cases the mentor is an individual who has been there and done that. So I'm learning from somebody that's got some real practical experiences. But again, you can see there's benefits to training, there are benefits to mentoring in doing that. So what you need to think about is what's right for you. I mean, think about the situation that you are in. Think about the audience that needs to be developed, and what might that be? It's important to understand that, believe it or not everybody wants to have a mentor. Mentoring will not work for everybody. Also, training courses will not work for everybody. There's a lot of different learning styles in what people are doing, and so, you can't say that everybody learns from training or everybody learns from mentoring, because it can be different. So you've got to stop and think about, okay, what's the situation, who is my audience, and how is this going to work in doing that. With mentoring, you might want to consider, with training, you might want to consider using training if it is a situation where you need that structure. You need for people to learn A before they learn B, and B before they learn C, and so on. If you need that structure and the absolute consistency to make sure that individuals are learning something and the message they're getting and the information they're getting is absolutely the same, that might be a good time when you want to consider using training. Also, if you're looking for a quick return on investment in what you're doing. And in that situation, because again, you're going to be able to create the course, you're going to be able to use it over and over again in whatever you're doing. And again, with those pre and post assessments, you'll be able to get a much quicker evaluation and return on investment in doing that. If there are changes in a specific job role, and you've got to get those changes out quickly, and you've got to make sure there is again, a consistent message. It's very focused on a job role. That's what it needs to do. Again, this might be where you want to make sure you use training. Or if it's around specific skill or expertise. So it's focused on a specific skill. And again, you want structure, you want consistency, and making sure that it's really focused on what you're doing. Another time you might want to choose training is if it's a team-based skill or knowledge area that you are trying to teach. The classroom or the workshop or doing things in that team-based atmosphere can be really great, because what it is you're trying to teach people to do, they need to practice in a team-based culture in what they're doing. So that might be another time when you want to make sure that you use training. Now, when you want to consider using mentoring, you might want to think about this when you're looking for something that's a little more flexible and people need to think about learning on their own time. And when I say on their own time, I don't necessarily mean after hours or those types of things, but I mean they need to kind of choose their own time when they're going to be learning, and not based on a specific class schedule in doing that. You also might want to consider using mentoring if you're looking for a deeper return on investment, because mentoring is usually longer term. You're looking at something that is usually going to be a lot deeper, a lot more focus. It goes into, again, that application on a longer term. That's why you might want to use mentoring. When you're thinking about a holistic type of development and individual development, again, this is where you might want to consider mentoring. And again, keep in mind when we talk about this, about that partnership, that relationship that the individual is building with another person, and how great it is in a mentoring partnership to understand that I've got somebody that really is focused in on me. I'm getting individualized attention. I'm not one of many, but I've got somebody that really is thinking about me. They're thinking about what I need to learn. They're thinking about areas in which I need to develop. They're thinking about my learning style. So again, this is when you might want to consider using mentoring. And then also, if it's very specific competency development and reinforcement, thinking about that 70-20-10 rule. Because again, being able from a mentoring standpoint to take that and work with someone that the individual can learn from specifically, taking that to very specific application and knowledge reinforcement in my area of what I need, and really being able to put it into practice and put it into assignments. Again, 90% of that type of learning taking place. So those might be all the reasons that you might want to consider mentoring when it comes to development. But again, we believe most of all in what we call this blended approach. And here's all the reasons you might want to think about that. If you want to accelerate reinforcement of your training content, again, going back to the client that I'd mentioned, the individuals went to a training course and then they immediately went out in the field and they used what they learned. So they learned it in a training course and then they took it out and put it into practical application in the field. And then they went back and learned some more, and then practical application. Talk about accelerating reinforcement of what they had learned. It was a great way to do it. If you want to support tacit knowledge, and you want to make sure that it's actively practiced in what people are doing. So it's not just a matter of going to a training course, still only retaining, let's take it up to the 20% in what we're doing. But then how long after the training is the individual actually going to be able to practice what it is that they've learned? So, looking at taking that tacit knowledge and making it actively practice as soon as possible and doing that. Also, it encourages confidence in filling in knowledge gaps in what you're doing. Again, thinking about the fact that with mentoring, I've got somebody that is focused on me. I'm getting individualized attention. That in its own way begins to encourage confidence. And it helps to fill in knowledge gaps, because I might go to a training course, and let's say that there's 5 things that need to be learned in this training course. And I'm fine on 1, 2, 4, and 5. But that third element I'm having a real problem with. But knowing that I've got somebody that's going to help me with that specific area helps to fill in my knowledge gaps, and also gives me some confidence that, I'm not stupid because I didn't get the third one. But it makes me feel better that someone is going to be able to help me. And then what it also does is it helps to keep your mentors appraised of current training. So I can guarantee you the client we worked with, in which they were doing training and then mentoring and training and mentoring and training and mentoring, they were up to date on exactly what was being taught in the training courses and in what they were doing. I'd like to take a kind of a side approach here and talk about a study that was done by Stanford University in a paper that they wrote. And the paper was titled, Using Mentoring as a Form of Professional Learning. And I will tell you that it really focused on teachers and teaching and how they many times felt isolated. But as I was reading through it, I really began to figure that, it can relate to any profession. It can relate to any of us. It really, again, focused on teachers and teaching and how they felt lonely and isolated, because they're supposed to know everything. They're the teachers. So it was difficult for them to find someone to help them in their knowledge gaps in doing that. And, it does really kind of relate to all of us, because when we go into a job, we're kind of supposed to know everything. And sometimes when we have a knowledge gap, we feel isolated as to who we can talk to and discuss any areas that we might not feel real confident about, because we may not want anybody to know, those areas. Just not feeling real confident about doing that. So mentoring is a way by which we can feel less isolated and actually receive professional support in doing that. Learning in itself is a complex process, and it requires putting the knowledge and understanding that we have into practice. Part of the problem is we can all have that knowledge, but then taking that to understanding and practice could be a little different in being able to do that. So the thing that we want to add to that then is the fact that we all learn differently. And I can tell you that a facilitator's nightmare when they are working with a group in a workshop is everybody getting it? Because you're looking at a group of individuals and they've all got a different learning style. And so, how do you get through that? And yet if an individual is working with a mentor and the mentor, is working with this mentee, and the mentee is an active learner, the mentor's going to know for that individual that, okay, they got this training, now they need to do something with it as soon as possible. Or if they've got an intrinsic individual and an intrinsic worker that, they really want to take what it is they've learned and kind of figure out themselves how it kind of works in with their role in their job. Or if they've got a global learner, looking at somebody that, okay, I've got these facts now, what's the big picture here? And there's many different ways and kinds of learning. But, when you're looking at this, what mentoring can really do, and looking at that blended approach, is it can greatly enhance that process of making that tacit knowledge much more specific in what you're doing. So at this point in time, Sarah, would you take us through our next poll?
Sure, Judy. Our next poll is, where do you think that a blended approach would work best within your organization? You can select leadership development, career development, onboarding, or a specific job skill development. So far, Judy, leadership development's leading. About 50% have voted. Looks like we're almost done. Okay, Judy. 48% voted for leadership development, followed by 33% with career development.
Okay. Actually, this is kind of odd, and I apologize. Not quite sure what's happening with my screen. It's jumping around. So, again, these are the kind of things that we see, and leadership development can be a great way to use this blended approach in what you're doing, because think about, some of the leadership courses either you've gone to or you have actually facilitated in what you're doing. And think about the fact that there are so many things that individuals are using and learning in this leadership course that they're going through. And they've got to be able to take some of that and go back and see what it looks like in the real world. So, yeah, leadership development and career development, these are really great in what we're doing, and we find that. So now let's get into talking about, how do I go about at creating this methodology of a blended approach. Well, the very first thing you've got to do is you have got to present a business case for this. I mean, before you get going and decide you want to do something like this, you have got to create a business case for doing this. Why is it that it would be a good way to do it? And again, I apologize, I'm not sure what's happening in my screen in doing this. You have got to make sure that this is going to work, and
Judy?
You have got to get buy-in. Yes?
Could you try resharing your screen, please?
Yes.
Okay, we see your slide.
Can you see it now? Yeah, because
yes.
Okay, is that it?
That's it. Thanks, Judy.
Okay. All right. Again, before you get started on this, you have got to make sure that you've got a good business case and that you have got good stakeholder buy-in in what you're doing and taking it forward. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is look at your present training catalog and in what you've got, and determine if, when you're looking at your training catalog and you're looking at each of the elements and the courses that are involved, determine if mentoring is able to achieve any of those learning goals or objectives that are a part of that. Mentoring may be suitable if the skill to be developed requires feedback on a continual basis that they're going to get in their mentoring partnership. If learning needs to take place over an extended period of time, and again, when we talk about this leadership development, everybody doesn't suddenly learn everything they need to know about leadership and then suddenly able to go out and do everything. So, this can be learning taking place over an extended period of time. And if individuals need to actively practice this learned skill or behavior. And again, thinking about leadership development and career development and these types of things, many times we can't assume that we're just going to give somebody this course and all will be well. We're much better off if you're able to then kind of take it in segments and give them areas to learn and then let them go out, meet with their mentor, and get feedback and so on. So again, first thing is, after you have built your business case and gotten buy-in, to look at your training catalog and kind of think about what courses are we offering that really could, look at this blended approach in what we're doing. The next thing that you want to look at is go ahead and develop your mentoring program and what you're doing. Start by developing that program. Determine what type of mentoring program is most appropriate. Is it going to be a one-to-one mentoring? Is it going to be reverse mentoring? Is it going to be group mentoring? Is it going to be is it going to be focused on leadership? You know, what type of mentoring program is most appropriate? Then, if you can, integrate your LMS with your mentoring software. We definitely suggest you have mentoring software in place because it keeps your mentoring program from becoming an administrative nightmare. But if you can integrate your LMS with your mentoring software, then you'll have access to an e-learning catalog within your LMS, and individuals can quickly select courses that will support the mentee's learning plan in doing this. So after you've looked at all those courses, determined which ones will work, then, and you begin to develop your mentoring program, look at which ones will be best for the mentee to look at. Ensure all the participants are committed. In other words, that mentors and mentees both understand their roles and they're committed to this type of learning in what they're doing. And then agree on the structure, the process, and the learning goals for the partnerships. And when we say partnerships, we're talking about the mentor and mentee partnerships because we know that individuals learn from each other in being able to do this. So develop your program by determining the type of program, integrate it with your LMS if at all possible, ensure participants are committed and agree on the structure. And again, thinking about these types of things. Now, the next thing you need to do is you put your business case together, you've reviewed your catalog, you've started your program, then you want to make sure you launch it in doing that. And the first thing you're going to do is when you are launching that mentoring program is to create an internal marketing program outlining the program and its benefits. This is one of the areas that we find is most important. It's not just communicating. Many times organizations really confuse communication with marketing. Communication is a part of marketing, but you really need to market your mentoring program and let people understand the program, its benefits, what it's all about, everything about it. Market your program. Brand it if you at all can in what you're doing. And then qualify your mentors. One of the things that we talk about when we help organizations go through a strategic plan to create their mentoring programs and their mentoring strategies is we talk about, we talk about the fact that the success of your mentoring program is highly, in fact I usually repeat that about 3 or 4 times, but highly dependent on the quality of your mentors. So make sure you've got good qualified mentors. And then you want to make sure you provide training for your mentors and mentees. Don't assume everybody knows how to be a mentor. Don't assume everybody knows how to be a mentee. One of the things that we talk about is that we believe a mentoring partnership is mentee-driven and mentor-guided. And I can tell you when we go through training with these individuals, they agree. That's my role. As a mentee, I am to drive this. As a mentor, I am to guide. But they really don't understand what that looks like when it's demonstrated, and they really want to know. So make sure you provide training, not just an information program, but make sure you provide training for your mentors and mentees in doing that. And then implement a mentoring technology tool. Again, I can tell you that if you have any more than about 50 or 60 pairs, you want to make sure you've got some kind of a technology tool to help you, or it can become an administration nightmare. And we hear individuals all the time using spreadsheets or whatever it might be, and you know they really are just swamped. And then use some kind of an assessment at the end of the training that you're giving to make sure that the mentees' learning plan goals are specific to what it is they need. Make sure you do your matches based on those needs and those competencies. And then for your program overall, set some specific goals for your program and when you want to be able to go back and be able to evaluate. So you might say, well, we want to do some evaluations and we want to check in on everything every quarter or every 6 months. And, there might be things that you want to check in, such as the number of individuals that have logged in to the mentoring software, or based on those individuals that have logged in, how many have been matched. What's the percentage of the goals that have been achieved in the learning plans that people have put together? And these are the types of things that your technology can easily tell you as you're going forward in doing this. And then after you, again, put your business plan together, you check your training catalog, and then you're, going to create your mentoring program, and then you're going to launch it. Then what you want to do is make sure you can measure your results in doing this. Assess the mentee again after the partnership to measure the learning has really taken place in doing this. Also make sure you assess the mentor from their perspective and what they're doing. And you might even want to talk to and assess managers and how they feel about in doing this, in taking this forward. Again, this is where you're going to see a lot of advantage of having software that is specifically designed and focused on mentoring in going through that. And then examine the impact of removing all or a portion of training courses and what you're doing. So again, what we're talking about in this blended approach could be a situation where, as an example, we had an individual, and we're going to call him John. And he transitioned in a new role about a product he was going to be selling, and he went to a class. And the way that the class had previously been handled is it was 3 days of training and going through that. But again, going back, John was assigned a mentor who he would go again to training, and this actually was a different client than the one I've mentioned. And then he got a mentor that worked with him for 2 months after he went to a training, and then he would go back to training. So again, this was in taking this 3-day course and breaking it up, and so he was only in class maybe for, instead of 3 days, he was only in class for about a half a day, then would go out and work with the mentor, and the mentor filled in all those gaps for him. So it's a way to actually look at, possibly not totally changing your training program, but how can you maybe reduce it? Because again, the first thing I know facilitators get is if you say it's a 1-day course, they'll ask you, what can you do in a half a day? If it's a half day, so what can you do in 2 hours? So think about, what are those things of the courses that you've got that you actually can go back and say, we could reduce the class time of this by adding in a mentor in doing that to kind of supplement the focus of the training course. Then what you want to make sure is that, you want to be able to then look at things, has learning increased, have costs reduced, and were everybody that participated, were they happy in doing that and going forward. You want to make sure that you time the mentoring partnerships to begin as soon as possible after training ends. And that way you can be really sure you're reinforcing what you're going to be doing. Now, you might want to think about examining the impact of removing a portion or possibly all. Look at your courses closely. Could you be substituting? In other words, there's this one course you've been wanting to get into the organization, but the organization says, no, we haven't gotten the money for it. Is there a course that you have in your catalog that, we could turn this really into a mentoring approach in what we want to do? Confirm that you've got good qualified mentors and make sure you've got manager support and that everybody understands their role. But you might want, if you look at it and examine them very carefully, you might find that you actually have courses that you could totally substitute with mentoring. So at this point in time, again, Sarah, will you take us through our last poll?
Sure, Judy. Our last poll is, in the future, will you consider using mentoring to support your training needs? You can select one answer, the first which being yes, maybe in the future, no, because I don't see how we can replace it with mentoring. So far, we have about over 50% have voted. So far, yes being far in the lead. I'm going to give you a few more seconds to vote. Okay, Judy. It looks like 81% voted yes, followed by 19% with maybe in the future.
Okay. And I would like to thank all of you for that 81%, because one of the things we wanted to do and accomplish during this session was to get you to open your mind and think about all the possibilities that you can have to reduce your training expenses in 2017. And if 81% of you will look at that possible blended approach, I think we've actually been able to do that. I wanted to just quickly give you one last case study that we had. Over 2 years, and I know you all have seen this, employee population increased, but the training budget remained the same. The number of individuals they wanted to talk about and training was higher. Okay, what they were able to do was they looked at that blended approach of training plus mentoring, and here were their results. Number one, crucial funding was freed up. So they were able to kind of switch some courses around, and the ones that were really important they could put more into or add to, because others had been freed up because they had taken them to mentoring or a portion of them to mentoring. Efficient and cost-effective use of the training budget. That was what they were able to report to their senior management. And then increased hours of professional development activities. Not necessarily just training, but professional development activities were realized, and no increase in the actual training costs of what you're doing. So again, that great blended approach. So how can we help you? Well, we have something called a PiM Model in doing that. It stands for Plan, Implement, Evaluate, and Manage. Plan how your organization can roll out mentoring as a talent development initiative. And we do this through what we call a high-impact mentoring readiness workshop. And what we do is to really help you to look at planning a very good mentoring strategy in what you're going to be doing. We also, in that workshop, talk about how you can implement a successful mentoring program using our solutions and training. And what we also do is to give you a heads up about all the things you need to have in place to ensure you don't hit too many pitfalls in what you're going to be doing. During that workshop also, we help you to understand how to evaluate a structured mentoring program so that you can achieve all the results for your organization that you set out to do. And then talk about how you can manage your program return on investments and demonstrate results through, again, having a technology solution to optimize the results, and again, keeping your mentoring program from becoming an administration nightmare. So some final thoughts. We want you to think about mentoring can be used to supplement or replace training, and again, thank you for that 81% that said they're thinking about that. We've opened up your minds to that. Mentoring, like training, should be formalized, measured, and tied to business objectives. I can't tell you how important this is because, again, individuals many times roll out a mentoring. They roll out mentoring. They don't roll out a mentoring program. And so it's not formalized, it's not measured, it's not tied to organizational objectives. And then make sure your mentoring program is successful by defining and clarifying the purpose and the roles of everybody that's going to be involved. Provide training, and make sure that you attain sponsorship as you go forward. So at this point in time, Sarah, do we have any questions?
Hi, Judy. Yes, we do. The first question is, you mentioned building a business case for supplementing or supporting training with mentoring. How do we do that?
Well, one of the first things you want to do, as we talked about, is make sure you do understand what all the benefits are. Make sure that you very specifically understand the organization's objectives and how mentoring can affect those objectives. So look at what your organization's objectives are, and then how can mentoring affect those objectives. Talk about all the benefits of being able to do that the benefits of using mentoring either to supplement or to replace certain training in what you're doing. So be ready to, prepare or to present all of that information, and then talk about ways in which all of this can be measured in doing that. Many times in organizations don't think in terms of measuring mentoring, and we believe you should, both from a quantitative return on investment to a qualitative standpoint. The strategic planning workshop that we have really is designed to provide you with all the information to do that. But again, basically, if you start by looking at your organizational objectives that mentoring can affect, and then presenting all the benefits of how mentoring can achieve those objectives and what they're doing, the plan that you would have to be able to either supplement or replace training in what you're doing, and in addition to that, to think in terms of how you would measure.
Thanks, Judy. We have another question. Is there one type of learning focus that seems to lend itself to using mentoring more than others?
I would say that mostly what we're looking at are things that actually you brought up yourself around leadership development, career development. It's those areas where you really, practical application of what someone has learned is most important. We find many times that if it's a very specific skill, technology, or just around excuse me, please, a job role, that many times individuals can put that learning into place right in the classroom. But when you're talking about more softer areas or sales or, again, leadership development, career development, these are the types of things that people will learn in a classroom, and then they need to be able to practice them and find out what works, what doesn't work, what they need to change. They need to get feedback in what they're doing. So I would say definitely in those areas where it's probably less technical, less specific, job focused from a very specific skill standpoint, and much more around maybe some of the leadership, career development, softer skills.
Thanks for that, Judy. Our next question is, how do we go about determining what programs we have that might benefit from being replaced or supplemented by mentoring?
Okay, first thing you want to do is go through your training catalog, whether that's online or whether it's in a book or wherever it is. And first of all, start with those that probably are a little more around the focuses that we just talked about. Career development, leadership development, the less job-specific technical skills in doing that. And take a look at that course. Try just analyzing one and ask yourself a question in looking at a specific course. And the first question really is, okay, I'm going to look at this with a very evaluative eye and figure out what could I cut out of this course that mentoring could help with. And look at it. Is there practice? Is there a specific exercise? Many times a leadership course has a business case to it. Could that be, done with a mentor? Is there, practice that goes on in within the course itself that could be better done when someone is in their own job role, and they're looking at that? Really take a fine-tooth comb and go into looking at each training course with, I'm going to cut this training course, either by totally or by, I'm going to cut it by 50% or whatever it might be, and look at it very strategically and figure out exactly what elements that are a part of that you could, make and would be much more beneficial even in a mentoring partnership. But be critical. Be critical. Don't let your emotion be a part of that. Many times when we look at a particular course, we talk about the fact that, yeah, but I really like that course. And everybody really liked that course. So we're not talking, keep your emotion out of it if that's at all possible.
Thanks for that, Judy. Our next question is, how do you ensure when using the blended approach that both are working?
Got to evaluate. You've got to evaluate them just as you evaluate your training courses as you go through. You've got to evaluate the partnerships, and you've got to evaluate the mentoring portion of that. You've got to go back, just like we had said, and we talked about that measuring results. You've got to think about, does the mentee has learning increased? And you can do that from the mentee standpoint, possibly even from the manager standpoint, if they have seen that learning has increased. And then, were you able to reduce costs on a particular course in what you were doing? Was everybody that was involved, the workshop participants plus the mentors and the mentees, were everybody satisfied with the results? You've got to measure both the training and the mentoring partnerships both to be able to, just like you would a mentoring program, you've got to be able to, or excuse me, a training program, you've got to be able to look at both aspects of the blended approach the same way.
Thanks, Judy. Our next question is, what can be the costs of mentoring?
The costs of mentoring are really your startup costs in what you're doing. It's the actual time to plan it, to have a very specific strategic plan in place to do that. That's one of the things that we help organizations do. You've got to make sure you've got a good solid process and methodology in place to before you roll out your mentoring program, so there could be a cost there. Training your mentors and mentees, there can be a cost there. And again, we definitely suggest that you have a mentoring technology software that is specifically designed for mentoring programs, that you have that in place. So most of what you're talking about are startup costs in being able to do that. What you've got to be able to do, and we have a lot of organizations that actually do this, is they compare the cost of their training, what they're getting out of training, and compare the cost of the mentoring program. And you've probably got a little longer term that you want to look at than an immediate, but even over a year's time, we've had organizations that know they have saved dollars because people got the learning that they needed in the mentoring partnership. They didn't have to go to a class, so it was time off the job. They didn't, they were able to say, okay, we saved that time off the job, we saved travel costs, we saved training costs, we saved participant material costs, all sorts of things. So it's basically, a lot of it is your startup cost, and then with your, ongoing, you've got to have somebody to manage the program, and unless you've got an incredibly large program, and we do have organizations that have that, normally that doesn't have to be a full-time job for one person, but after your startup costs, you've got to have somebody that can manage and administer the program overall, and do follow-ups and check-ins to make sure everything's going as it should.
Thanks, Judy. Our next question is, what are the types of employees that would be better with training rather than mentoring? For example, low-level employees versus executives.
That's kind of interesting, and I guess we have to think about who are lower-level employees. Again, I would say those individuals that are in job roles that are very, very specifically skill-focused, and the skills they're learning are very specific to a job. Probably not as much. But I do have to give you an example of an organization we worked with, and the main focus of what they wanted to achieve was around diversity and inclusion. And this was real inclusion, because they took this all the way to the plant floor. And so we were doing training with mentors and mentees, and some of these mentees were individuals that had been in the plant for anywhere from 25 to 30 years, and the same with the mentors. And they never got this kind of training, and they were absolutely thrilled with it, that they had the opportunity, that they had somebody that was really focused on them. They weren't part of just a group that was a data dump that came to them in training. So I would say probably training is best, again, for those situations, not those individuals, but those situations in which someone is learning a single skill versus someone who is learning larger, softer skills. But I think you have to get it out of the type of individual and more looking at the type of training that is involved. I hope that helps.
Thanks for that, Judy. Well, it looks like we're out of time for today. Judy, do you have any final thoughts?
No, I don't. Like I said, I really was very encouraged with that 81% of individuals saying, you know, hey, we think we want to look at this, and we would be glad to help you. If you have any questions that I was not able to get to today, please feel free to contact me at jcorner@Insala in what you're doing, or at any point in time, go to our website for any of our white papers, previous webinars, or work that we have done in this area. So thank you very much for your participation.